So there's this massive battle brewing for the future of AI, and it's not about the AI models themselves. No, it's about the plumbing. It's a classic story of scarcity, opportunity, and a real David versus Goliath fight for control over the very engine that powers our new world. This whole AI revolution we're seeing, it all comes down to one critical ingredient, these specialized chips called GPUs. They have become the digital gold of our era. They're scarce, they're incredibly valuable, and literally everyone is scrambling to get their hands on them. And right there, that's where the problem starts. See, the biggest tech companies on the planet, we call them hyperscalers, they saw this coming a mile away. They moved fast and basically snapped up the lion's share of these chips, leaving a ton of AI startups, researchers, and even big companies out in the cold, desperate for computing power. While into this void stepped a whole new wave of scrappy, specialized companies. They saw a massive opportunity in serving everyone who was left behind. Their promise was simple, but honestly revolutionary. Let's democratize access to the most important resource in AI. Let's offer an alternative to the giants. So who are these new players on the block? They've sprung up seemingly overnight, and they have a name, the Neoclouds. You have to understand, these companies popped up for one simple reason: the global GPU shortage. They are laser-focused on providing raw computing power, or GPU as a service. They offer something called bare metal, which is kind of like renting a dedicated, super powerful server without all the extra software. It's for the AI startups and researchers who just couldn't get a foot in the door with the big guys. And this is where their value proposition really shines. While the hyperscalers might put you on a long wait list with rigid, super expensive contracts, Neoclouds are nimble. They can get you up and running faster, their terms are way more flexible, and, get this, they can be dramatically cheaper. We're talking up to 85% less in some cases. They just give you what you need: pure, raw processing power. And don't think this is just a couple of startups in a garage. No way. It's a full-blown ecosystem. More than 100 of these Neoclouds have popped up all over the world, and they're backed by serious money from venture capital, private equity, and even sovereign wealth funds. Everyone is betting that this is the next big thing. So, okay, on the one hand, you can see why investors are so excited. It looks like a massive opportunity. But on the other hand, what if the whole business model is actually a fragile house of cards? Let's get into that high-stakes gamble. Investors are pouring billions into these companies, and here's the story they're buying into. First, they believe renting hardware is just the first step towards selling high-margin software. Second, the demand for AI compute is just so huge it can't fail. Third, even older GPUs will still be valuable to some customers. And finally, they think the big chip makers will support them. But if you peel back that layer of sunny optimism, you find a business model that is, well, built on a razor's edge. When you really look at their core business today, just renting out hardware, it's an incredibly tough game to win. At first glance, a 60% gross margin sounds fantastic, right? But here's the catch. That margin has to cover the immense cost of the hardware itself. That leaves almost zero room for error. If rental prices dip even a little, or if their expensive servers aren't being used almost all the time, the entire model just flatlines. And what makes it even riskier is the relentless pace of technology. Every time a new, more powerful chip comes out, the value of a Neocloud's main assets, their existing chips, absolutely plummets. They're in a constant race against time to make their money back before their incredibly expensive hardware becomes obsolete. And when you factor in all the costs, the power to run these things, the people to maintain them, and the fact that the hardware is losing value every single day, the picture gets even tougher. The real profit margins can actually be lower than a lot of non-tech retail businesses. For a high-tech business, that's not great. And this is a really critical point. To stay afloat, many of these Neoclouds rely on huge contracts with just a couple of big clients. This creates a massive risk. For some of them, over half their entire revenue comes from one single customer. And here's the wild part. That customer is often one of the very hyperscalers they're supposed to be competing with. This crazy dependency leads us right to the heart of the matter, this central structural paradox that these companies absolutely have to solve if they want to survive. So here's the pickle they're in. The future that investors are dreaming of, that high-margin software business, requires Neoclouds to build services that compete directly with the hyperscalers. But the hyperscalers are also their main clients, the ones paying the bills right now.
How can you build a business to take on your biggest customer without them just dropping you and collapsing your revenue?
And if this whole situation feels familiar, it should. We have seen this movie before. During the first wave of cloud computing back in the 2000s, a bunch of startups popped up to fill the gaps. But as the hyperscalers got bigger and bigger, they either bought their smaller rivals, pushed them aside, or forced them into tiny niche markets. The big question is, are we just watching a rerun?
All right, so if they're not doomed to repeat history, what does a sustainable path forward actually look like for these neoclouds? It really seems to boil down to three potential outcomes. Their best bet is probably not to take on the giants head-on. Instead, they can carve out a niche, like offering sovereign cloud to governments that don't want to use US-based tech giants. Another path is to double down on being the best place for AI startups to get their start, building deep loyalty. And then there's the final, inevitable path for many: get bought by a bigger player, or just fade away once this great GPU shortage finally eases up. So at the end of the day, this is the question that billions of dollars of investment are riding on. Did these companies just spot a temporary glitch in the market, a fleeting moment of scarcity they could exploit? Or have they actually built a permanent, essential new layer of the internet that's going to power AI for decades? Their ability to evolve beyond just renting out hardware will decide everything.